Welcome back. Well, a little earlier I spoke to the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Richard Fuller. This is what he had to say. And Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Richard Fuller, joins me now in the GB News studio. Lovely to see you this morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much indeed for being here.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, but I am going to start by quizzing you about Nigel Farage, of all people, because he appeared at the Parliamentarian of the Year Awards, which The Spectator put on in the week, and he said this: "I've got a bit of a shock for you. I think that I and 4 other people, the newcomers into Parliament this year in the general election, were a shock, and I'm very sorry, but at the next general election in 2029 or before, there will be hundreds of newcomers under the Reform UK label." He said, "We are about to witness a political revolution, the likes of which we have not seen since Labour after the First World War. Politics is about to change in the most astonishing way. Newcomers will win the next election." How concerned should Westminster be about the rise of Farage, particularly in the Conservative Party?
Well, I think we should be worried about it because obviously the last election, with people voting for Reform and not voting Conservative, we've ended up with a Labour government with a very large majority that's doing things that Reform voters and Conservative voters don't think is right, like taking away the winter fuel allowance. It's very damaging. Jobs tax is going to punish small businesses. So Mr Farage is talking big, but the fundamental maths of Westminster remain the same, which is we have a Labour government and we need to unite as opposition parties to try and defend the values that we share.
So when you say unite as opposition parties, do you think a time will come that Reform and the Tories will have to get their heads together, form some kind of alliance to keep Labour out of power next time round?
Well, I don't know about that. By uniting, we saw that this week in the second reading of when Labour were trying to put through this jobs tax, and we had Liberal Democrats, Conservatives, Democrat Unionists, Scottish Nationalists and Reform voters, MPs, all voting the same way. We'll recognise that the main challenges for this country is a Labour government doesn't seem to have a grip on the economy and is making some very poor choices. And that's where I think we need to put our heads together, whether you're Reform, Liberal Democrat or Conservative.
But from a practical perspective, come the next general election, and I appreciate we've only just had an election, and you were helped to spearhead the Conservatives' campaign. Something's got to change here, because you can't have Reform on the right of the Conservatives and the Conservatives as they are right now, not having conversations, not forming some kind of deal. Maybe it's about some of you standing aside in some seats, some of Reform standing aside in others. How else can you defeat Labour? You can't have the right split like this. So there's going to have to be some serious conversations between Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage. And yet Kemi Badenoch doesn't want to entertain the idea of speaking to Reform, even though you know, Mr Fuller, that a lot of Reform voters in the last general election are former Tories.
Well, I think that question is directly at Mr Farage, because he says he wants to destroy the Conservative Party. You don't go into a discussion with someone to say, hey, let's all get together with an opening line is, I want to destroy you. That isn't the right approach. So Mr Farage, I think he has to... You're right to say that it's early days. So we'll see in a couple of years' time, will Mr Farage's rhetoric change? Will he stop saying that he wants to destroy the Conservative Party? Will he look at the issues that you've just raised, that if the vote is split from people who have Conservative principles, that we get another Labour government with a big majority doing damage to our country? That is for Mr Farage to say, you know what, I was wrong. I didn't want to destroy the Conservative Party. Now let's see how we can make sure that we get rid of a Labour government that's doing damage in the country.
Why are we even in this position? Reform and Nigel Farage were on zero when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. A lot of this is the Tories making, isn't it? The rise of Nigel Farage is the Tories' fault.
It's the parliamentary party, actually. It's not the Conservative Party. We've got very good activists, very good councillors across the country. But there was a problem with the Conservative Parliamentary Party between 2019 and 2024. We did have COVID. That was a big issue. Took us off track.
Only since 2019?
I think fundamentally the problem was 2024, which is where it looked like because we were in 2019, we were there to deliver on, get Brexit done and to take advantage of the new opportunities having left the European Union. People feel disconnected from the people in this country who make decisions for them.
Yes.
And the Conservative Party had the opportunity to say, we want to put you back in control. And over 5 years, we took our eye off the ball. We weren't delivering on things.
That's an understatement. You didn't deliver on any of your manifesto key pledges.
Well, we delivered on a number. We got Brexit done, which is number one thing.
You didn't deliver on immigration. You didn't deliver on tax. Those are the 2 things that unfortunately cost Rishi Sunak the last general election.
So let's just separate the two. So I think on immigration, you're right. We didn't deliver on that. And that's fundamental thinking we have to do. And Kemi Badenoch's already said that we need to go back to the drawing board on that and work out what we need to do. My personal view is a large part of the issues on immigration aren't to do with all the controls, it's to do with how we see our economy, how we want to grow our economy. And so we need to do our thinking about that. But then on taxation, I'm a big believer in lower taxation. I had to vote for tax increases. They're not in my DNA, but that was because we had to pay back the bills from all the money we put out for COVID, because there's no such thing as a free lunch. You've got to pay your bills when you incur them. So I think that was the reason. But your fundamental point, which is the Conservative Party needs to focus on getting back to being a party that can credibly say, we want to reduce your taxes, make your household budget better for families, is what we want to do, not what Labour is doing, which is increasing taxes on.
Just going back to my point about reform and Farage being on zero when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, in retrospect, was the ditching of Boris Johnson a massive mistake by the Parliamentary Party?
Well, I've been asked this question a number of times. My view in the last Parliament was we should not have got rid of Boris Johnson. I think that was a mistake, and my colleagues were asking the wrong question. They were saying, let's get rid of Boris Johnson. You should never get rid of a Prime Minister midterm unless you really, really have to. That's just a bad thing to do because it's difficult to be Prime Minister. You can't put someone in on day one, essentially on a moving train 100 miles an hour and think that things are going to go well unless you've really thought about that. So my personal view has always been it was wrong to get rid of Boris Johnson.
Do you think Kemi Badenoch's made a strong enough start? I don't mind telling you, Mr. Fuller, that we were at the GB News Christmas party last night. Thankfully, I'm teetotal, so I'm fresh as a daisy this morning.
Yes, you are.
Can't say the same for some of my colleagues, but that's another story. And there was a bit of a discussion about how the leader of the opposition had started, slightly shaky at PMQs. Somebody sort of made the point that she seems to have toned down a bit on some of her more punchy rhetoric during the campaign. Is she sort of trying to play it a little bit safe? Because actually, the converse argument to that is Kemi Badenoch's got nothing to lose and everything to gain from just taking the fight to Labour. And yet, to be fair, we've spent a lot of this interview, I appreciate they're my questions, but people are talking more about Nigel Farage being the opposition than Kemi Badenoch. That's a problem, isn't it?
Well, Kemi's trying to get a programme for government that is in 5 years' time, not trying to grab headlines. Today, she's been very clear that she doesn't want to come out with policy after policy after policy right now. And that's because we need a fundamental rethink about how government operates in this country. And that's what she's tasking her shadow cabinet, including me, to think about. What I like about Kemi is that she is clear. She has very strong conservative principles. I think they're going to resonate with the people of this country, certainly where I come from, in Bedfordshire. People feel very strongly positive about what she can do and what she can offer to this country. So I think let's watch this space. It takes time to grow into the role of being a leader of a country. It isn't just about sound bites. Kemi's very clear about that. It's about working out a programme for government that can gain the trust of the people, and that's what she's focused on.